Show, taking your business from seed to sapling to towering giant. With your hosts, best-selling author and business growth experts Noah Fleming and Shawn Veltman. This is the only show that gives you proven, pragmatic, and immediately applicable business growth strategies every week in 15 minutes or less. Here's Noah and Shawn.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Evergreen Show. It's another lovely Monday morning, and here I am with my co-host, Mr. Shawn Veltman. Shawn, give me the weather. Where are you today? Tell me you're somewhere other than Calgary, Alberta.
Well, I am soon to be en route to lovely Windsor, Ontario, to meet up with you and do some good work.
Well, that's good. So, listen, here's what we got to talk about today. On a recent podcast, I said something, and you called me out after. You said, "Hey, you need to clarify that for our trusty, loyal listeners." I said a number of times, I hate surveys. I hate them with a passion. You said, "Noah, you don't hate surveys." In fact, we use surveys to gain customer feedback. In many cases, we use surveys in a number of ways. You said you hate one specific kind of survey, and you need to clarify that, and I will clarify that today. I hate what is considered the de facto customer loyalty survey used by businesses and organizations across the planet, known as NPS surveys, or better known as Net Promoter Score. And the reason I hate this survey is because companies use this, and everybody that's listening here has either used NPS or received NPS surveys. It's a single question that asks you, how likely is it that you would recommend our business to a friend or to a colleague? And you usually get this survey by email, and there's a little chart that you're allowed to click 1 through 10. And then there's possibly a single follow-up question after that says, why did you give us a 3 or why did you give us an 8? But that's it. And the reason I hate this is because I talk to companies all the time that use this as a way to, quote, pat themselves on the back and tell themselves they're doing a good job. Or if they get negative remarks, negative scores, they don't really use that information to go out and ask how we can do better. So, Shawn, does that clarify for our listeners well enough after you stormed in and said, hey, you can't say that?
That's a fine clarification. I think you hit it right on the head there. You and I have talked a lot about our loathing for the Net Promoter Score. I think we hate it for different reasons or slightly divergent reasons, but it certainly annoys us both to no end.
One company, I got the email after 4 years of doing business with them. Right? How likely is it that you're able to or how likely is it that you would recommend us to a friend or a colleague? I got this question 4 years after doing business with them. Meanwhile, I had hardly ever heard from them in that 4 years. Once in a while, I maybe got an email or some sort of promotion or pitch, but never anything qualitative, never anything to ask me, what was my experience like? How could they actually improve? My experience was actually pretty good, but I felt sort of like, it kind of felt like a smack across the face to me to get that question then. More so when I've gotten that question from businesses and I've given them, a poor response. There was a hotel recently I stayed at. It was a very expensive hotel, but I gave them a 4 on that because there was a few things that really annoyed me. Nobody ever reached out afterwards to say, hey, wait a second, why did you give us a 4? Right? What happened here? So I think there's just so many problems with this. And, I hate surveys, Shawn. I hate NPS surveys.
That experience you had with the hotel, that reminds me of a distinction that we often find when we're working with companies, where people tell us, well, we're doing this, or I need to do that, or whatever it is. And our follow-up question is typically, what are you going to do differently once you have that information? What are you going to be able to do differently once you have this training or this new system in place? And so often people jump to what they think they need without even understanding how their world is going to change after they have it. So, that twigged in me with your hotel NPS example. Somebody found out that you are not going to recommend them. What you would think they would do with that information would be to find out why, to correct, to make a course correction. But instead, it's just a score. It reminds me a lot of the old joke of the drunk guy who's looking for his keys under the lamppost. And somebody says, well, did you drop them there? He said, no, but it's light here. I can see. And he picked the easy place rather than the place that's going to be affected.
And the flip side of this, of course, is the company that gets 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s. And then they think to themselves, well, golly gee, we're doing everything great. There's nothing we need to do to improve. But the fact is that if I say, I'm a 10, I'm pretty likely to refer you or recommend you to a friend or a colleague. I don't then drop everything in my life and go actually make that referral or that recommendation, right? Like, I don't spend the rest of my days on this planet deciding how I'm actually going to give you referrals. And so the other problem we see on the flip side is that it is that pat on the back factor, in which I'm not going to refer you unless you have a referral process or a way to tease that referral out of me. I'm not going to recommend you unless you ask me to recommend you. And you have ways to do that because my life is busy. My kids got up this morning, drove me crazy, and went to school. I don't wake up thinking how I can give those companies that I give 10s to on their NPS surveys more business.
That's right. We often have to remind companies and sales departments that nobody stays up at night wondering how they can make you more money and help you improve your commission and help your company rise up a few levels on the on whatever ranking you have. They don't care about you. They don't care about anything that you're doing. And any assumption to the contrary is just wishful thinking. We see NPS scores a lot. We see companies using them, and the term that I like for it, and I've used it before in this podcast, is an abdication of responsibility. You put this into place, you get a score, and then you don't do anything with it. You say, oh, we've got an 80%. We've got a 40%. Nothing we can do about it. Oh, at least we know. Knowledge without action is useless.
We're obviously being a little hard on NPS. Let's give some credit where credit's due. So for a long time, NPS was, as I said, the de facto customer loyalty gauge or measurement. It was created by a guy named Frederick Reichheld, who was, considered the grandfather of customer loyalty. But Reichheld himself said something interesting over the past couple of years in an interview with Bloomberg or somebody. He said, the surveys jumped the shark. And another reason the surveys jumped the shark, and I don't think jump the shark's even the right term there, but he said it's jumped the shark because what companies do is they game the survey. And so I had this experience when I was buying a car, right? The salesman after the sale said, hey, you're going to get this survey. Just make sure you give us all 10s. And he said, this is happening in businesses everywhere, that regardless of what happens, look, you're going to get this question after the fact. I just need you to give me somewhere between a 7 and a 10. And again, this practice of let's just use this to pat ourselves on the back, as you said, the abdication of responsibility to actually do anything meaningful or useful or qualitative with that information, it's useless. And so I guess what I'm trying to find is, well, I already know, but let's talk about it. What's the better way for our listeners here to be gauging this type of feedback? What else can they be doing to get better feedback that will actually help them improve, help them create a better customer experience, increase revenue, all that stuff?
So, one of the things that you hit on, Noah, that I think is absolutely critical is if you are going to use the survey, and the survey does have a lot of advantages. It's an email question. You can get a lot of reach from it. If you're a larger company and you've got hundreds of thousands or millions of clients, you can certainly have a lot of reach and capture a lot of high-level customer sentiment. But the caution that I want to give is don't stop there. That's a starting point. You and I often talk about the fact that so many people stop at what is an introductory point. So whether it's looking at reports and saying, oh, we made more money this year, good, and they stop there rather than trying to figure out why and how to exploit that. Or they look at an NPS score and they say, oh, we have 73%, good. Instead of using that as the jumping off point for a better set of questions or a more in-depth set of questions, like, are there any commonalities between the people who are giving us low scores? What are our best or most profitable clients and prospects giving us on the score? How can we do deep dives into these to get more information that's actionable? What are we going to do with that actionable information? Whatever the questions you ask, these should be starting points, not pat on the back abdications of responsibility.
Yeah, and so again, you hit on a number of things there too. A lot of the work we do, internal benchmarking, things like that. So let's find what's the commonality between all of our locations that score 80 to 100% versus this group that scores 20 to 30%. What's different in the experience? What distinctions can we find? And so I think what we're saying there is so right on the money. It's that all of this becomes a starting point to asking, what else can we do better? How can we actually utilize and harness this information? So when the person says they are going to recommend or refer us, how do we actually get those referrals or those recommendations? This to me is just again, it's something that gets me fired up. I started railing against surveys, and I think there can be some value to surveys if we use them, as you said, as a starting point for us to get better or to get the result or the information we want. So, Shawn, we're at what are we? We're about 10 minutes into this here. Is it time to get into a challenge? Is it time to start asking our listeners, for those that are using NPS or are using those surveys, how they can use them better or more effectively? What do you think?
I think it's absolutely time.
So, okay, here's my challenge for you. And you may have another challenge to add to this, of course. But if you are using NPS surveys, first, we wrote this in a blog post, but bow your head down in a few moments of shame and then decide, I'm going to stop using these. But if you're not going to stop and you're not going to convince your people to stop because you've made that big investment, I would challenge you to ask yourself this: what can you do to start using the information you gather to do something more meaningful, to actually create action out of the results you get? So if you are going to keep using them, again, as Shawn said, how can you use the information as a starting point to create meaningful and positive change with your clients, your customers? What can you add on? What can you do differently with that information now that you have it? If you're not using NPS and you're using some other survey, again, ask yourself how you can use this as a starting point. And if you're not gathering customer feedback at all, I would challenge you to start looking for ways to gather information that you can use to make meaningful, positive, and qualitative decisions about your business. Shawn, I'll give you the floor.
I think those are great challenges. Just for fun, I think one of the things that's always interesting is take a look at what people have said versus what they've actually done. If you can track referrals, see how many people who've actually given you referrals gave you high marks in the NPS. And did that correlate with reality? What we find so often is that there's very little correlation. People who give you 10s all over the place are no more likely to refer than people who give you 5s. So first and foremost, see if you're getting any useful information out of that. And then, exactly as Noah said, ask the questions, figure out how you can dive deeper, and maybe you take everybody who gives you a 9 or higher and reach out and actually ask for that referral. Don't just expect them to put money in your pocket for no reason. Put your referral generation system into place.
Well, after this discussion, I'm feeling a lot better and I'm glad you called me out on that and said, hey, we need to do a podcast about this, because I think it's so important. I think it's so valuable to our listeners. I think it's so tremendously important to the people that are using NPS to try and find ways to use it in more meaningful and impactful ways. So thanks for that, Shawn. I appreciate that as always. I'm sure there's going to be more things you're going to call me out on after this recording goes live, but that's how the cookie crumbles. So anything else you want to add?
I think that covers it pretty nicely. I look forward to hearing from everybody what your experiences are with NPS and what your experience specifically with our challenges are. And I can't wait for our next discussion. They're always lively and fun.
So you guys know the routine. If you like this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. I don't know why, but everybody says that. They must be important. Definitely, if you know people that would get value from this, share it with them. If you've done NPS surveys with other organizations and you know the presidents or the CEOs or the VPs of sales and marketing, share this with them, because we think they'll get value from it and we'll certainly appreciate it. You can always get in touch with us on my website, noahfleming.com. Hit the contact button, and we will always get back to you. No robots here. Otherwise, Shawn, let's do this again next week. You in?
I'm in.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to join us each and every week for another great episode of The Evergreen Show with your hosts, Noah Fleming and Shawn Veltman. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time on The Evergreen Show.